American fellowships are awarded to women scholars completing doctoral dissertations, conducting postdoctoral research, or finishing research for publication. They must be U.S. citizens or permanent residents. Ida Street, a pioneer in the field of early Native American history, was the first American Fellowship recipient, and that was awarded in 1888. We have 2 American Fellows with us today, and Kathleen Chaw will introduce the first, and then Liz Bathgate. So Kathleen.
I get to introduce a true Renaissance scholar. Alani Hicks Bartlett is originally from Pennsylvania, from Chicago, and then she'll tell you more about it. She's ended up here at UC Berkeley. She's going to talk about not just her doctoral, but postdoctoral research. You see, she at Bryn Mawr got a triple. She was part of a master's as well as master's and undergraduate in Italian, Spanish, and French, and with a specialty in medieval and other kinds of medieval and Renaissance. And then she's going to tell you how this is, and the beauty of this in our very specialized world, how she, in a sense, connects the past to the present and future. So may I introduce Alani Hicks.
Hi everyone again. Thank you so much for that introduction, Kathleen. Before I begin, I just wanted to express my gratitude to the AAUW. I first learned of the AAUW as an undergraduate student at Bryn Mawr College. One of my favorite professors, who was a French professor by day and kind of a self-appointed college historian by night, would often tell our class anecdotes and share with us details regarding the life of Catherine McBride. In 1942, she was Bryn Mawr's 4th president and one of the most influential and brilliant educators to come through that part of Pennsylvania. Dr. McBride completed 3 degrees at Bryn Mawr, and she worked in education and philosophy before becoming president. And she's since acquired kind of a legendary celebrity status amongst the alumni at Bryn Mawr. So in any case, Catherine McBride was very active advocate of women's education, and these class discussions often dovetailed with conversations about other organizations that Dr. McBride was involved in and supportive of, particularly those like the AAUW that have such illustrious histories of empowering women and have so staunchly worked to combat the socioeconomic, gender, and racial disparities that far too often render education and other forms of success inaccessible. So anyway, some years later, when I was perusing the college archives and photo collections, I remember coming across a photograph of Dr. McBride with Dr. Anna Rose Hawks, the president of the AAUW from 1955 to 1963. And so I found my interest piqued again. All this just to say that for quite some time, even from my undergraduate years at Bryn Mawr College, I've been really impressed and encouraged by the AAUW's mission. I greatly appreciate the outstanding commitment to and support of university women, and I'm very grateful for the generosity which affords me the time to dedicate to my research projects. And for me, that translates to a very singular and precious professional opportunity. So thank you. I'm so grateful. As was mentioned, I'm a recent graduate of the University of California, Berkeley, and I completed there a joint PhD in Romance Languages and Literatures and Medieval Studies. My linguistic and area focus was on classical literature, Latin, French, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese literatures. And then at Berkeley, I also completed a designated emphasis in gender and women's studies, which meant that not only did all of my coursework and research center around women, sexuality, questions of gender, and things like that, but the teaching opportunities that I had did as well. En route to the PhD, I also completed an MA in French literature from Bryn Mawr, and 2 MA degrees, one in Italian from Middlebury, and one in Spanish from Middlebury College. So, and I just wanted to say a little bit about, in terms of my academic background and what drives my research, I've always focused on alterity, gender, and violence, and particularly on the different forms of violence: governmental, religious, political, domestic, that can hinder one's opportunity and create conflict between groups. In my French master's thesis, Homo homini lupus, Alterity, Violence, and the Power Dialectic, I took a series of literary instances in which descriptions of cannibalism were used to metaphorize racial and sexual alterity in order to examine these against political insurgency. My Italian master's thesis was on Petrarch's Canzoniere and Baudelaire's Fleur du Mal, and I examined metaphors of fragmentation and lack, and the other types of violence-oriented metaphors that are used in love poetry to describe women's bodies. Finally, in my Spanish master's thesis, If by silence I lived, then by silence I'll die, I studied the rhetoric of silence and how it was mobilized against women in order to reify them in the tragedies of Spain's Golden Age. I fundamentally believe in the compound nature of literature, obviously, and my dissertation at Cal, Vows and Violence in Medieval and Early Modern Chivalric Romances in France, Italy, Spain, and Portugal, reflects this approach. I offered a comparative examination of the relationship between oaths and the physical aggression that is sparked when oaths and promises are broken in early modern epic poetry. I basically took broken promises as a type of textual screen through which all discussions of alterity, gender, and racial difference must be read. My argument reads vows as speech acts that reveal an individual's understanding of the self and other, as well as the gendered and racialized dynamics that are implicated therein. So now, my most important project at the moment is my postdoctoral manuscript, The Cure Gone Awry, Gender, Disability, and the Ailing Empire in Early Modern Europe. And in this, I offer a comparative study again. This time, however, it's on medicinal metaphors and references to failed doctors and failed bodies in early modern English, French, Spanish, Italian literature. I analyze literary descriptions of illnesses, disability, and the prescriptions of cures in the works of Shakespeare in particular, Montaigne, Machiavelli, and Calderón de la Barca. And by linking vulnerable bodies to political infirmity, I evaluate what examinations of the gendered body portend both for the individual and for the nation. So just in terms of the criticism on this subject, many monographs have analyzed the political, religious, and socio-cultural upheavals of the turbulent early modern period, yet this interdependent relationship between illness, gender, violence, and political theory and literary metaphors has not at all been explored, nor has it been done in comparative fashion, as I hope to do. Critical works are often grounded in considerations of history or political theory to the exclusion of literature, or they take a literary approach but consider the historical and political context only elliptically. Moreover, while the field of gender and women's studies has started playing a key role in these assessments of early modern literature, its prominence and considerations of political theory and doctrine are often overlooked. Also, approaches that explore the early modern obsession with physical health and bodily integrity in the light of major recent interventions in the field of disability studies are also egregiously lacking. So therefore, a very rich field of inquiry and an important intersectional approach to the early modern period has been left greatly unexplored. This is precisely what I want to, what I'm seeking to amend with my manuscript, The Cure Gone Awry. Now, to give just one very specific example of how I intend to discuss this initial desire for extirpation and the connection between physical violence and bodily fragmentation, a central chapter of my book focuses on the curious upward trend in wife murder plays, and wife murder literature during the early modern period. Now, sadistic, grotesque, these plays have been categorically understudied by critics who have been scandalized by the seemingly gratuitous violence that they seem to portray. Consequently, they are often misunderstood as a type of vicious propaganda that models uxoricide as a panacea for an adulterous wife, or as a remedy for problematic notions of alterity, disability, gender difference, that all ultimately cast wives as aberrant or nefarious. However, given that the husband's motivations and actions are continuously pathologized, from his obsession with honor to his inquisitorial mania, hysteria regarding ethnic difference, and so on and so forth, I argue that both husband and wife are presented as ailing patients. They fear contamination, they both fear and recur to injury and dissection, describing their bodies and the bodies of others in fragmented parts. So the major point that I'm trying to make with my book is that despite all of these examples of fragmentation and violence, corporal vulnerability, and disabled bodies are frequently lauded in these same early modern texts precisely because they represent alternative and novel capacities. These allow for the ideation of new political identities. What once appeared as vulnerable, susceptible bodies are then represented as having unique groundings and unique capacities that are suggestive of more productive conceptualizations of the body politic. This renegotiation ultimately lends to innovative and more accurate configurations of national identity. So hopefully with the Cure Gone Awry, I will be able to forge new ground in literary and cultural studies. I will be able to offer comparative analysis of seminal early modern texts that are rarely put into dialogue with one another, and by using prose works as a theoretical anchor, I'll be able to also give attention to some of the subtler arguments that are put forth by early modern tragedians. And most importantly, like I said earlier, I will be able to address a serious lack of scholarly attention by prioritizing the connection between physical and political health and between disability and gender studies in early modern literature. So I thank you all very much for encouraging and supporting my project.
My name is Liz Bathgate, and I'm honored to have Kim Long as my fellow this year. She grew up in Munster, Indiana, and attended the University of Indiana, and she was a biology and French major. Originally thinking she was going to teach high school, but she found out that she absolutely loved laboratory studies. So for the past 6 years, she's been at Berkeley doing laboratory studies and working on a PhD, and I'll let you listen to her tell you about it.
Hi. Thank you for that introduction. I'm a sixth-year PhD student at UC Berkeley in the Helen Wills Neuroscience Institute. I'm from Indiana, a suburban town, actually not too far from Chicago. And when I was growing up, I was very fortunate to have a very supportive family who always fostered my love of science from an early age. So I always loved school, and I think maybe after my 20th year in school now, you might say that I like it a little bit too much. But science was always my favorite. I had, some of my best memories are playing in my backyard with chemistry kits, a telescope, and I also had a microscope kit that I didn't really know how to use, but I made my way through it. So I went through school thinking that I would be perhaps a high school biology teacher. I always loved biology, and I thought that, it would be really great to teach students like myself, students who loved science and wanted to pursue science. But then all of my goals changed when I went to Indiana University, and I started working in a research lab. I love the joy of discovery and of conducting experiments, and I haven't looked back since then. So I'm at Berkeley now. I study something that is pervasive to our society and to our culture, and something that I think every single person in this room has experienced at some point or another, and that is stress. So throughout my time at UC Berkeley, I've studied how moderate stress can actually be good for you, how it can enhance memory and help your brain in some ways. I've studied how maternal care can affect the way that offspring respond to stress in adulthood. So, the care that you receive from your parents when you were young, how does that affect the way that you respond to stress later in life? But my thesis work has now revolved around how severe stress can bring about anxiety. So about half of all the people in the US will experience a traumatic event at some point in their life. And about 8% of those exposed to a traumatic event will eventually go on to develop PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. But 8%, that means about 92% of the people will actually be able to recover from the traumatic event that they experienced. So my research is really looking into what is it in the brain that separates these two populations of individuals, those who can recover from stress and those who go on to develop persistent anxiety. So what separates the vulnerable from the resilient? And can we help those who are vulnerable to stress? Particularly, though, I'm really interested in sex differences and the differences in anxiety between men and women. So women are twice as likely to develop PTSD after a traumatic event. Women experience the symptoms of PTSD for longer than men do. And women are more sensitive to any stimuli that might remind them of their traumatic event. So there's clearly some sort of difference going on between men and women, and I'm interested in sort of uncovering the biological origins of those differences. So research on this topic has been neglected. So there have been plenty of studies in anxiety and stress and how stress leads to anxiety, but most of those studies from a biological perspective have focused on males and male rodents and those types of things, those trying to understand the biology of males, sort of as a cop-out excuse because females are too variable. So I'm hoping through my work to close that gap and to help understand what's going on in the female biology and female physiology to bring about differences in anxiety after stress. So I study the brain, and those familiar with the brain can tell you that the neuron is the basic cell, the basic unit of the brain. They form connections with each other to make you think, feel, and behave the way that you do in your everyday life. But there's actually another type of cell in the brain, another group of cells, another class of cells, and those are called glia. So glia means glue, and glia support and surround the neurons in the brain. And they've always been sort of thought of as, well, nothing more than glue, right? Just kind of holding the brain together, helping the neurons out, but really it's the neurons that do all the heavy lifting. But my work has actually been looking into glial cells because over the past decade, we have new research showing that these glial cells can actually do really amazing things. They can change the structure of the brain. They can change the way that neurons make connections with each other, and they can change the function of individual neurons. So really then, these glial cells can change the way that you think and the way that you act. So my work has been focusing on a region in the brain called the hippocampus. It's extremely important for the development of new episodic memories, so forming a memory of, say, this room and this event and this luncheon. And that region, the hippocampus, is also extremely important to regulating the stress response. So it seems like a really good target candidate region. And I actually found that in this region there is a relationship between glial cells, a certain glial cell called the oligodendrocyte, and anxiety after stress. So in my rodent model, the more glial cells in this region, the hippocampus, the more anxiety the animals showed after stress. And this is different in males and females. So I'm exploring this difference between males and females. I'm exploring how these glial cells can change the function of the hippocampus, and I'm seeing whether or not we can use this as a target, a potential target for novel therapies for those with PTSD and anxiety disorders. So as I've become more involved in research throughout my graduate experience, I've come to understand and personally experienced the struggle to secure funding for research and for students. Science suffered a lot during the recession, and funding to major institutions for biomedical research has been scaled back, or at least hasn't increased to the rate that inflation has gone. So in my third year, for example, my lab actually was very well funded when I entered into graduate school, and then I ran into a situation where our funding ran out and we didn't have any new funding. And so all of a sudden my lab was struggling to stay afloat. We downsized by about half. And to support my stipend, I had to start teaching extra, which really cuts into my ability to perform my research, my ability to publish, and my ability to graduate. So I'm not sure that I can convey how much this fellowship has meant to me. Your support has enabled me to continue my work, to focus on my research and my career. You've given me peace of mind. and the peace of mind to continue my research and my goals. So I cannot thank you enough for standing up to support science. I cannot thank you enough for supporting graduate students and believing in us. And I cannot thank you enough for supporting women from all aspects of life, from all walks of life, as they pursue their dreams. So truly and sincerely, thank you.
Career development grants support women who hold a bachelor's degree and are preparing to advance or change careers or re-enter the workforce. The first grants were awarded in 1972, and we have 3 career development grant recipients today. So Jodi, if you'd like to start, and then Catherine and Laura just continue right up after them.
Hello, I'm Jodi Gordon, and I'm going to introduce Sharon Capizzuto, who is studying at San Francisco State in teaching. University of San Francisco, excuse me. And she is going to tell you a little bit about the specialization that she's taken, and we spoke to her at our table about what AAUW is doing in the field of tech track.
Thank you, Jodi. I am very humbled and honored to be here. I'm not going to cry. I wanted to write a speech, then I didn't want to write a speech, then I wrote a speech while my husband was driving me here. I changed the speech, and I'm taking notes, but first and foremost, I just want to say how grateful and thankful I am on behalf of all the women, past, present, and future, that AAUW has just poured into. This organization is a new organization for me as a master's student, and I'm very thankful for my director, Dr. Sandy Fenderson of the Masters of Arts in Teaching program at USF, who sent an email out last year when our cohort started in about August or October. So a little background on that is, I saw the email and I kind of just put it to the side. I didn't really look at it because she sends a lot of emails at the time, so I didn't look at it. After towards the end of that first semester, as a returning student at school, sort of, I'll get into that later, my classmate reached out to me and said, "Hey, did you get that email from Sandy a few months ago when school started?" I said, "I got a lot, we received a lot of emails, so which one?" She said, "There's a scholarship, a grant that you're eligible for," because she, like myself, was entering academia and changing careers after being gone for so long, which is one of the requirements. So we went to Hawaii in December, and I came back, I believe the deadline was December 16th. So I came back a day before the deadline, and I poured out, I put in work into this application. I had started a little bit before, and so lo and behold, on April 14th, I got an email and I started screaming. My dog's frightened, he's running around the house like, "What's going on?" I got an email that said, "You have been chosen. Here is this grant." So fast forward to going to school the very next day or so, and I run into my friend Chelsea, who told me and said, "Make sure you fill it out." "Hey, Chelsea, did you get the email? Did you get the email?" No, Chelsea didn't get the email. So I was the only student, I believe, at the University of San Francisco that received this grant. I'm not sure how many applied, but I encourage Chelsea not to be discouraged, because if she needed help in writing for future grants, I would make myself available. As a teacher candidate, I can help you. I can teach you how to write really good papers to get what you want, because I have received every single scholarship and grant that I've applied for since starting my journey in my master's program. I have not been turned down, so I'm on a really good streak here. And I'm just very thankful. I don't remember applying in my undergrad, but this master's thing is taking on a whole new meaning to me. So I'm thankful, I'm appreciative to AAUW. I am so glad that Dr. Fenderson sent that email and, you know, opened my eyes to an organization that I heard very little about. And, you know, there's just so much opportunity. I'm all about, you know, making sure that women have the opportunity and advantages that we sometimes don't get. So, and that just brings me to how I got here and where I came from. So I was born in a third world country. I came to America when I was 6. My parents, very humble beginnings, very poor people, but one thing they always pushed was make sure you get your education, make sure you study, make sure. My dad was very passionate, as I shared with Jodi at the table, about math and science, so I didn't have a choice but to like math and science. And I'm glad he pushed me. I'm glad he pushed all 4 of us. We're all college grads. My brother has a Juris Doctorate. My sister has 2 degrees. My youngest brother graduated from UC Davis. He's working on his 2nd degree. But it's not about where you come from. It's about where you're trying to go. And even though we didn't have money growing up, we didn't have any money. Very little money. So I just want to say that my passion really is being more astute for just humanity. And I definitely have a soft spot for women, for girls, because I'm a woman. And in my scholarship, I don't have a long and very well-founded scholarship right now, because I'm just starting out on this journey. But I will get to where my 2 predecessors that went before me today. I'm going to get to the level that you guys are at, because you guys are amazing, and I thank you for the work that you're doing in your fields. But for right now, my focus is on getting more girls into STEM and to trying to figure out how we can, as a nation, as a community, whether it's at a school, whether local, national, I don't know. We need to have more STEM-focused programs for girls, specifically. There is a huge shortage, and I just don't think that is right. I think that there is a huge disparity in the numbers of girls that enter STEM fields, and we need to change that. We need to change that, because it will just make, I believe, I did see a few emails, and I did see some literature over there. It would just level the playing field for women, for them to be able to have the same access to the jobs and the careers in that field. So my scholarship right now is trying to focus on how to bridge that gap. And by doing so, I am an overachiever, so I'm not only pursuing one credential in teaching for my master's, I decided to just go for it with this grant, especially to pursue a 2nd credential. And my 2nd credential is going to be in biological sciences. So the grant has afforded me the opportunity to seek not 1 but 2 credentials in teaching. And then from there, I hope to get my doctorate in international multicultural education with an emphasis on human rights education. So that's where I'm at right now. But thank you guys. I'm very humbled, very honored to be here. And I didn't even look at my notes. I don't remember what I was supposed to say. I just spoke from my heart, okay? This is from my heart. Thank you. I have one quote. Sorry. Just one quote. I have one quote, and it's from Nelson Mandela, and his quote is that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. So this grant has afforded me the opportunity to use my education as that weapon, because it's a very strong weapon, and it's a very fierce weapon, and I'm going to use it. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to introduce Kara Leong. She is studying at UC Davis. She's here today with her husband Ed and her daughter Kimberly. So we've had a great conversation at the table. She is kind of a local girl. Her parents went to UC Berkeley, but then she had to grow up in Oregon where her family moved. But she returned to California and got her undergraduate at UC Davis, but has been doing what many of us did. She has been running a business for 15 years and has left that business to study at UC Davis again in a field that we had a great conversation at our table, because what does everyone in California love? Wine. So we've learned a lot about what she's doing to improve the wine economy and varietals, and I'll let her tell you more about them. Welcome, Kara Leong.
Hi, everybody. Like she said, my name is Kara Leong, and I am a second. Oh, closer. Can everybody hear? Oh, yeah, big difference. As I was saying, my name is Kara Leong. I'm a second-year master's student in viticulture and enology from the University of California, Davis. If anybody isn't familiar, viticulture is the study of grape growing, and enology is the study of winemaking. Let's see. I actually graduated. I actually graduated from Davis in '95 with a degree in plant biology with a molecular cellular genetics emphasis. That's a mouthful. And then I actually went back in 2001 and got a second bachelor's degree when we were still allowed to do the second bac in landscape architecture from the University of California, Davis. So I took the last 15 years and worked as a landscape designer and a real estate consultant. And then the last 9 years as a stay-at-home mom. So my daughter there in the corner. And then I thought, she's finally old enough, she's in school, she's moving forward. It was time for me to think about what I wanted to do. I have a very long-lived family. We usually typically just make shy of 100 years. And so it was time to think about another career. I always wanted to get a graduate degree. So I called the university. Well, originally, my family still owns land up in the Willamette Valley, and we were thinking about putting a vineyard and a winery up there for the last 30 years. And I thought, well, I have a plant degree and I have a landscape architecture degree. I'll just take a few courses and we'll throw on some grapes and make wine. Well, so I thought, okay, well, I'm in Davis all the time. Most of my clients are there. I'll take a few extension courses. None of the extension courses I wanted to take were available. So I thought, well, maybe I'll audit some courses. And then I was looking at the degree and realized that I had all of the requirements to do the master's program. So except for one upper division stats class, which I'm a little worried about. So I called the professor, the chair of the department, and I'm talking to him, and he's giving me the same spiel that's on the website. You need to have a GRE score of this, you need to do that. And then I said, well, you know, I've been a landscape designer in town for the last 15 years. And he said, oh, I so need to talk to you. So we talked a little bit more about the program, and then I said, well, you know, I'm not here to solicit business, but I am in town, and I could come take a look at your project. And he said, I can be home in 30 minutes. So 30 minutes later, I'm sitting in his backyard. 2 days later, I signed him to a contract. 6 weeks later, he started getting bids for landscape construction work for his backyard, and now he has an 80-foot bocce ball court in his backyard that we have yet to use. So I keep telling him, gotta have all the classmates come out and use your bocce ball court. So, and then 6 months later, I got accepted into the program. So, and it's a small program. They only take about 18 to 15 students a year. It's a master's program, and I'm a little different than the rest of my classmates. Most of my classmates are in their 20s, maybe a few of us in their 30s. I'm 44. So some of my classmates I could be the mother of, and in the normal college fashion. So I'm the oldest in my cohort, I'm the oldest in the program. So my responsibilities are a little bit different than most of my classmates. So currently I'm working on 2 different research projects with 4 different researchers. At Davis, in the viticulture and enology, we have a huge project, a huge research experiment being conducted. It's called the Pinot Project. It's a collaboration, it's in its third year. It's a collaboration between Ron Runenbaum and Kendall Jackson, or Jackson Family Wineries. It's looking at 15 different vineyards across from the southern end of California through the northern end, and then 2 vineyards up in Oregon. And it's essentially looking at the same clone of Pinot Noir grown in the same way, managed in the same viticultural management practices, and harvested in the same way, fermented the same way, and then analyzed to finally answer that question: does site matter? Does terroir matter? So, and we're on our third year of that, and what it allows us to do is build upon. So you can build upon that project. It's the opportunity to try all sorts of things out because you have this backbone of a foundation of research. So both projects that I'm working on are branching off of that. One of them is a USDA contract that I started at the beginning of the summer, and that was to look at the soil microbiome. So I don't know if people are familiar, probiotics are huge right now, what's going on in the gut. That's essentially the microbial community that's living in your gut. Well, I'm essentially looking at the microbial community in the soil. So research has shown that what is in your soil shows up on your grapes, and what's on your grapes shows up in your wine. So what we're looking at, so think of soil as earth. It's dark, it's moist, there's a lot of nutrients in it, there are a lot of different things growing in it. Well, that dust will land on your grapes. Then you think of grapes as Mars. It's dry, it's hot, it's a brutal climate, so only the strongest survive on your grapes. And then what's on your grapes is going to show up in your wine, and it's going to affect the flavor of your wine. So there's huge commercial applications to that. And then of course in the future, if we know what that is, you can branch off with many different things, like can I alter my wine by altering my microbial community? So we're just in the starting phase, we're in the second year of that. So I came in and essentially I'm getting a molecular genetics section up and running in this USDA lab. And so I'm doing a lot of training in there right now. So that's very interesting. We'll be doing a lot of sequencing and seeing what's actually in there. So that's one of the projects that I'm working on. The other project that I'm working on, I've been working on for 2 years. It was just a little pet project that I brought to my professors before I came in. It was just something that I thought, oh, this is kind of different. So I'm looking at an old English clone of Pinot Noir. So luckily it's Pinot Noir. And it was brought over in the early 80s by a winemaker in Napa. And he's been making some fantastic sparkling and still wine with that Pinot Noir. But he's 85 and he's sold his property, and there are only 3 acres of this clone in the entire US. And 2 of those acres, the investment property company that bought is going to rip them out. So that's going to be gone. So that genetic information is going to disappear. And so, and another thing that's interesting about it is that it's showing, or at least it's been reported, we'll see, it's been reported to have very strong powdery mildew resistance. Now, powdery mildew is a fungal disease, and it's one of the #1 fungal diseases for wine grapes. You can spray up to 20 times a year to control powdery mildew, because as little as 1% of powdery mildew on your grapes will ruin your wine. So when you think about how many sprays that is, that's a huge environmental impact. So I am taking I've taken this grape and I have gotten into the germplasm repository at Davis, which houses these old random clones of wine grapes, and they'll house them for as long as they're in existence. They'll keep them clean, virus, fungal, disease clean, and they'll make them available to the general public so that anybody has access to them. So mission 1 is accomplished with that. Mission 2 will be to see how strong that disease resistance is. Mission 3 will be to see what the genetics of that might be. And then I just finished fermenting 3,000 pounds of grapes. No, not until next summer. So I just fermented, and they're in the cold storage right now, and I will be they were fermented in the exact same way as the Pinot Project, because those protocols are established. So once again, tacking onto that backbone. and I will see, does it really make a really good wine? And I'm going to compare it against three other clones of Pinot Noir. So, and that's with a grant with the Oregon Wine Board, because where I come from, Oregon lives off its Pinot. So we will see how that goes. So that's what I'm currently working on. So I just wanted to say how much this grant means to me. When I first came to school, I had this thought that I'd still be able to work and go to school. And 2/4 of 19 units of wine biochemistry and wine microbiology later, realized that maybe not the smartest idea. But the idea of giving up my businesses that I'd been doing for 15 years that were successful and up and running, and I knew what I was doing, was really, really hard to give up. So these grants have allowed me to say, no, I'm not going to stay up until 4 o'clock working on a CAD program to meet with a client. No, I'm not going to measure another yard in 106-degree weather in August. So I really appreciate that. So unlike a lot of my other classmates who are in their 20s, I still have a mortgage. I still have car insurance and private pay health insurance and utilities and daycare. And I have a husband who's been incredible, my husband Ed, who's been incredible about taking over everything in the household, from child to dogs to cleaning. But there are still things that have to be done, and this grant has been a huge boon. When I got this grant, after the screening was done, after the letting everybody know was done, there was the... So it took a huge, huge amount of pressure off. So I finished this program, and then the next step is to get a job, not be self-employed anymore, somebody else to do my taxes. My hope is to continue in agricultural research, because that's my strength. But it's also to continue with scientific outreach, and I've done a lot of fundraising in my past, a lot of nonprofit boards in my past, so the hope is to be able to go back into that as well. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to breathe a little bit, focus, and get done, move on, and then contribute to society again.
Hello, I'm Laura Wittenberg, and I'm the president of AAUW OML. And I'd like to introduce Elaine Present. She's currently at UC Berkeley, and she is studying engineering and architecture and all kinds of things. And I memorized them and I forgot the words. I'm sorry. But I asked her how she'd like to be introduced, and she said, "Just give my name because it's really complicated." She's a people person, and she's in architecture and engineering and construction and all this other stuff. So I'm going to let her talk about herself.
Hi. Hello. Good afternoon. I'm so happy to be up here. By way of introduction, I'm going to add that I am a huge energy nerd, and I'm going to leave the rest for a little bit later. I have 3 stories to tell. The first one is a California story. It's the story of the duck curve, and it may be familiar to some of you. It's sort of an energy story. It's specifically an electricity story, electricity being a form of energy. And, well, the thing with electricity is you pretty much have to generate it when you use it. And that's a challenge, because the state demands different amounts of energy at different times of day and different times of the year. A typical day might look something like this. In the middle of the night, very little energy demand. Throughout most of the day, medium-high level of energy demand, relatively constant. In the evening, huge spike in energy demand because everyone's going home, turning on their AC, their heater, their lights, their appliances, cooking dinner, while all the office buildings are still using their lights and their equipment, while all the retail stores are still open using their lights and their equipment. Huge spike. All right, so we have to meet that demand. Add solar. Gets so much harder because solar generates when the sun is out. And as the sun goes down, it rapidly decreases the amount of available energy, right as the energy demand peak is coming up. So things that are not solar have to rapidly adjust to make that difference up. So the ramp is ridiculous. Yesterday, I just looked it up this morning, 7,000 megawatts in 2 hours. That's about a third of the amount of energy California uses at one time, in 2 hours. It's a challenge, because we have things that can ramp that much. We're doing it, but the things that can ramp that quickly are not very efficient. And we're running out of them. As this ramp gets steeper and steeper, it's getting harder and harder to meet that. But I like a challenge. That was story number 1. So, how are you? You had a good lunch? Are you comfortable? In this space, in this room, are you thermally comfortable? Are you too hot? Are you too cold? Are you too hot and the person next to you too cold? We find that's the case a lot. I'm a building science student, and well, one of the things I've learned is that the goal, I'll say requirement, but that's not strictly true, when making a new building, a new space, is that 80% of the occupants should be comfortable. So that means 1 in 5 you're free to let be uncomfortable. So just know that you're the exception. However, my colleagues are finding that 80%, you want to know how many buildings are meeting that 80%? It's not 0, but it may be something like 10%. I don't have the error bars on that number. That's sort of ongoing work, but it's really low. You know what else I've learned? Buildings use 40% of the nation's energy. About a third of that, depending on a whole lot of things, goes to heating and cooling. So that's a little over 10% of the nation's energy going to make most people uncomfortable. I object. So that brings me to my third story. My third story is my story. I'm an energy nerd. I went to MIT for my undergraduate education. I got a mechanical engineering degree, and I got a charge to face the largest engineering challenges of our time. Pick as you will. I picked energy. After graduation, I was a contractor for 4 years for the U.S. Department of Energy. I worked on their appliance standards program. It says, how much electricity can my refrigerator or this pump use in order to be allowed to sell it in the United States? It's a very important program. It's a fairly old program. It's done a lot of good, and it is so limited. It's limited by Congress. Authority comes from Congress. Fine. It's limited. Congress is kind of a pain to deal with. And it's inherently limited that they're only allowed to look at each thing as it's sold in isolation. I can look at this light bulb, this refrigerator, this pump, this furnace. It turns out buildings are systems. All the pieces have to work together well in order to get any useful outcome out of them. If I change the light bulbs, maybe I put double the amount of light bulbs in a room, that's going to increase the air conditioning load because there's more heat now that has to be removed. I wanted to look at this system. I decided I'd had enough of everything in isolation. I wanted to look at the building system. I left my job. I went to grad school. I'm getting my master's degree in building science, and I'm finally seeing some solutions, some systems, people looking at both the things in isolation and the things together, people working on all kinds of things. I have one colleague who works on heated and cooled chairs. So you can control your chair using the amount of energy you need to be comfortable, and the person next to you isn't affected. You can add a few more things to the workstation in an office environment that do this, and all of a sudden you have this personal comfort system. Uses way less energy and makes everyone way happier. Because honestly, the air up there, I really don't care what temperature it is. There's a lot of work in my department as well on air movement. It turns out people really like air movement, and we're actually still trying to figure out why. Some of it's thermal. People feel cooler and more refreshed. Some of it's air quality. Americans spend about 90% of their time on average indoors. And a lot of that time is spent sitting in one place, breathing out, breathing back in that same air for the entire day. And if you have just a relatively modest amount of air movement, you can not breathe in that same air all day, and people like it better. So my personal research in this building science group is on ceiling fans. The California Energy Commission is interested in why we don't use them more. They have the potential to make people a lot more comfortable and save a lot of energy, especially in commercial office-type environments. So I'm going and looking at buildings that have ceiling fans. I'm talking to people that design buildings that have ceiling fans. And I'm trying to close the loop, which is very poorly closed in architecture, of after the building is built, to go back to the architect and say, here's the measurements we took in your building. Here's how it's actually performing. It's remarkable how little this is done. So this is nice. This is good. But there's a bigger system that I care about, and that goes back to my first story. How does the building interact with the grid? How does the building interact with the duct curve, with the electricity system? And that's a bigger question than my building science program can answer. So I decided to add another program. I decided to apply and was accepted to do a second master's simultaneously in the civil and environmental engineering department. My professors there are talking about things like battery storage. Do we put it at the grid or do we put it at the home? If we put it at the home, who pays for it? We talk about the electric grid system and saying, transmission, where do we put it to get the most good out of it? How do we make the duct curve better? We get some really cool interplays, like when solar is really plentiful in the middle of the day, if you run the air conditioning all day when you're not home and turn it off before you get home, it turns out that your house will stay comfortable all evening. Not every house, most houses. And so now that seems totally weird because you're actually using more total energy, but you're using it when we have plenty because of California's solar. And in the evening when it gets dark, you can kind of feed off of that. And there's many ways we can do that. We can do thermal storage systems. There's a whole bunch of stuff in this interplay between the two. The downside is that adding a second degree, and I'm doing 2 degrees in the time it would have taken me to do 1, it's more coursework. And that means less time for the funded research that I was doing. And then on top of what one of my colleagues mentioned, the funding is not as good as it was even just a few years ago. And I sat there last April and I said, I'm not sure this is something I should be signing up for. All of my financial projections are completely screwed up at this point. And AAUW has made up most of the difference. So I am doing 2 degrees in 2 years to look at this whole big, beautiful, terrible system we have. To try and get people to be more comfortable in our buildings while using less energy and using energy in a way that works for California's electric grid. Wish me luck.
In 1917, Virginia Alvarez Hussey received the first award to study at the Women's College of Pennsylvania, the Women's Medical College in Pennsylvania. Her academic and clinical work focused mainly on diseases in Venezuela, and particularly on leprosy. We have an international fellowship recipient today.
I'd like to start by thanking Sharon for putting us last, because best is last. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Marcela Cervini from Mexico City, currently studying at UC Berkeley. In chatting, I said to her, "What are you studying, Marcela?" She said, "Financial engineering." I said, "Oh, what's that?" And she began to tell me, and my eyes began to glaze over. I decided that she could tell you. But I found some really interesting things about Marcela. One is she's a softball player. She served on the Mexico City team that went to the national softball competition. She was the pitcher. Her team won. I don't think you could possibly have a better background for financial engineering. But here is Marcela to tell you about it.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for inviting me today. And I feel really honored to be here and really thankful to the organization for giving me this great opportunity. And well, I want to start to saying that I feel really happy to be surrounded by such a great group of very smart and accomplished women. I enjoyed listening to all of your stories. And well, as most of you, I also have a great passion for what I do. I grew up in a family of economists, so mathematics has always been very important in my development. Since I was a young child, my father increased my passion in mathematics by teaching me how to solve math problems, and this really increased my passion for the field. So I decided to follow a career in mathematics. I did a bachelor's degree in applied mathematics in Mexico. And well, during my undergrad studies, I decided that I wanted to explore more the applications of mathematics into the real world. And that's why I decided, well, that's when I discovered about financial engineering, which is a very interesting field that combines math and finance and brings great benefits to financial institutions and companies by lowering risk and hedging risks by doing new strategies with mathematical models. But I found out that in Mexico this field was still in its infancy stages, so I didn't have the opportunity to pursue a master's degree in Mexico. And that's when I learned that in Berkeley they had a really good program, and I really wanted to participate in this. But I found out that the cost of attending such a great institution were very high for me, and particularly with all the problems that we're having in Mexico economically and the depreciation of the Mexican currency. Strengthen financial institutions through the incorporation of more robust mathematical models and computer science tools in the financial industry. And in the long run, I see myself maybe forming and leading a great team that could improve these practices, and maybe start my own wealth management firm, and through this create influence decision makers and create positive practices. And well, and that's why I feel very grateful with all of you, and very happy to be here. So thank you very much.
I'd like to call on some of our staff from National now to make some closing remarks. So we'll start with Gloria Blackwell.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you all for the invitation to come here and participate in this wonderful luncheon. It's great for me as someone at the national office to have an opportunity to actually get to meet the recipients. We get to know them through their applications. We get to know you through the comments that the selection panelists say about you, whether or not you should get a fellowship, how you compare to other applicants. So it's fantastic to see the women who actually make it through. And congratulations to you all. It's very daunting to follow all of these wonderful, inspiring fellows. And I know that you're going to complete your programs, do great things, working in obviously fields that many of us didn't know anything about until you told us. I told the story at my table about how we're often asked in the fellowships department to have people give quotes or talk about their field, and they come up with very obscure things that we've never heard of before. So a few weeks ago, our PR person said, someone's writing an article and they want a quote or some kind of information from a fellow, and the field is biomimicry. So I turned to my team and I said, you have someone in biomimicry? They said, oh, we have someone in everything. So they go and they search through the database and they find someone in biomimicry. And people can't believe that every time you ask us, we can pull up a fellow or alumna in that particular field. So thank you, all of you AAUW California donors who make all of this possible. I really salute the hard work that you have done to make sure that the women that we are funding are keeping up with the needs in our society. That's very important. And as many of the recipients have said, funding is very, very challenging. And without the AAUW funding, there are so many fields that we would not have the proper research being done. So I'm always happy to hear from them. Because the second best thing to actually getting an AAUW fellowship is to be the person who awards them. And so my team has the great job at AAUW to take the funding that Tony and my other colleagues raise and have the opportunity to make sure that that funding is stewarded well and that it goes to deserving applicants like the people that we have heard from today. I've been at AAUW for quite a long time, I guess, by AAUW national standards. And during that time, my team has had the pleasure of awarding nearly $50 million in awards to over 3,000 women. And that's something that obviously could not have happened without your dedication. Each week, we take the opportunity to try and figure out who are the women who have received these fellowships. We go way back in the archives. Suzanne Gould, the archivist at AAUW, is one of my favorite people. She really has the best job in the building because she gets to unearth the stories of all of the women from AAUW. Each week, we also uncover a hidden gem or jewel about AAUW that we didn't know about before. Some of it we do very intentionally, some of it we just stumble upon. I'm constantly reading the paper or going to events. I send my staff emails at 1 o'clock in the morning if I'm reading something and I say, look this person up. I bet they were a fellow. Because in my world, anyone who ever accomplished anything had to have been an AAUW. That's right. So for all of you, from Marion Talbot on up, you've created something that you should be very proud of. You've created something that no one else created. No one else has created what AAUW has created. You should be very proud of that. Recently, we've heard about Tina Fey is making a musical, right? Based on the movie Mean Girls. Well, what you may not know is that Rosalind Wiseman, who wrote the book Queen Bees and Wannabes, was an AAUW Community Action grantee, and Mean Girls was based on the book Queen Bees and Wannabes. So we can take credit for Tina Fey's based on Mean Girls. Great. Recently also, so I have a poster in my office in Washington that actually commemorates the 1977 Women's Conference in Houston. And it's been there. It probably came from someone else's office and somehow it ended up in mine. So recently we received an invitation to go to a book launch at the Wilson Center in Washington to hear a new book by someone named Dr. Marjorie Sproul. The book is called Divided We Stand, The Battle Over Women's Rights and Family Values That Polarized American Politics. I said to my staff, look up Marjorie Sproul. I bet she was a fellow. And she was. So I sent someone down the hill to the Reagan building, and I said, buy the book. Get Dr. Sproul to sign it. So she goes up to Dr. Sproul afterwards and says, I'm from AAUW, would you please sign my book? She signs the book. My staffer doesn't even look. She just brings it back to the office. I got the book signed. In the book it says, to AAUW, thank you for the Lucy Howarth Dissertation Fellowship. It changed my life. Now, Dr. Sproul was a fellow over 40 years ago. I said to my team, right, I really don't remember what I had for dinner 3 days ago. But Dr. Sproul remembers the Lucy Howarth Dissertation Fellowship that really helped her move forward in her career. So we get those kinds of stories all the time. And it's important that we keep track of the women who have received AAUW funding. If you came to the National Convention in Washington, you had the opportunity to hear Dr. Tara Rye Trent, Oprah's favorite guest, right? Dr. Trent has a new book out called The Awakened Woman. Reigniting Our Sacred Dreams. She's traveling around the United States talking about her book, talking about what it meant to receive an AAUW fellowship at the moment when she was about to give up and go back home to Zimbabwe without a degree. You know, she had left her husband who had been abusive and she had young children. So she is now saying, that was the pivotal moment that changed my life. I was about to go home and I got a letter in the mail from AAUW saying, you've received an international fellowship. So we should be proud of that as well. This fall in the national office, we're hosting 2 fellows, not AAUW fellows, because we don't do that, but we're hosting 2 fellows from the U.S. State Department through an exchange program, one from Egypt, a man as a matter of fact. There aren't that many men in the national office in D.C. A man from Egypt and a young woman from Turkey. So Suzanne, the archivist, has been working with them on finding out who were the AAUW fellows from those 2 countries. She was home one evening, her daughter's reading a book for school, and the name on the book looked very familiar. And she said, I think I've seen that name before. She comes back to the office, opens up Idealism at Work, and finds out that this woman, who is now 85 years old, from Egypt, who was an incredible scholar, who was known as the Simone de Beauvoir of the Middle East, was an AAUW fellow. Her name is Nafez Al-Sadawi. The State Department fellows were thrilled. They passed it around to all of the other Egyptian fellows who happened to be there. And our fellow from Egypt, who's at Johns Hopkins, came to the office the next day. And now apparently we're very famous all over the Egyptian network as the group of women who funded Nafez Al-Sadawi. So those are just a few of the incredible women that AAUW has had an impact on. Jane Chen is another fellow who was here at Stanford, who worked with a team to develop a low-cost incubator for infants in developing countries. That incubator has now served over 100,000 premature infants worldwide. She credits AAUW with giving her the funding to make that happen. So for all of the recipients here, you probably now realize a little bit that you occupy a place with some incredible company. As Sharon said, Susan Sontag, right? There are lots of people who have come before you. And I really want to encourage you, once you complete your studies, to find a place within AAUW, to find a place where you can serve, to find a place where you can use those fundraising skills so that they can be of assistance to AAUW and the people who are coming after you. AAUW needs your talent, they need your commitment, and they actually need your energy as well, right? Because none of us are getting any younger. I know I'm not. And so I'll leave you with some information from Dr. Tara Trent's book, The Awakened Woman. I received an advance copy of the book at convention. By the way, the foreword was actually written by Oprah. We're going to claim Oprah one day. She helped Dr. Trent, we helped Dr. Trent, and somehow I think we're connected. But the thing that really stood with me is the fact that it really is a book that's taking you through ways that you can examine your life and figure out, you know, what happened to the dreams that you had when you were a young girl. Where are those dreams? It asks you to think about the world. It asks you to think about what hurts your heart and what are you going to do about it. And so I ask all of you, think about what hurts your heart. Now these days it's probably not too difficult. Think about what hurts your heart, what are you going to do about it, and how are you going to pass on this legacy to ensure that women and girls and communities continue to thrive in the years ahead. So thank you all very much for hosting us, and we hope that you will find a place of service within AAUW.
Tony Johnson, I know you have something to say.
Thanks, Sharon. And so good to see some of you, my old friends and new friends, meeting new people. It's funny, I have like 2 degrees of separation from all of you inspiring speakers. My father went to Berkeley, I went to UCSB, and my now 12-year-old granddaughter, Marcela, is a softball pitcher star, and a couple of years ago put her hands on her hips and said, Grammy, I'm going to get a 4-year scholarship to UCLA in softball. We'll see. I'll keep you tuned. Anyway, it's my pleasure to be here, and although we always say Gloria has a fun job because she gives out the money, you all and my team raise the money. We work really well together, and an example of that is a couple of months ago, I got a call from a woman in London. She's a financial advisor, and she said, Tony, my mom, you at AAUW made a difference for my mother. She was an immigrant, and she was being educated and got her support from AAUW to attend Columbia University. She lives in Houston now with my dad. There are 4 or 5 of us, I can't remember how many kids, all around the world, and we would like to give back. She would like to give back to AAUW. Can you and Gloria meet me and my family in Houston? It was the week of the hurricane. And I'm like, I don't think so. We later found out that her mom and dad got evacuated in a canoe. So I said to Gloria, that could have been us. Anyway, we will be seeing her, but it's so neat to see how it comes back to us, right? I'm here to give great greetings to all of you, particularly from our new CEO, Kim Churches. Kim, if you haven't met her, is a woman of vim, vigor, and vision, as I say. She has really done a lot at AAUW positively. We are wild about her. We think she's a wonderful leader. She is focusing quickly, has created a new organizational structure, has a strategic plan underway. Carolyn Garfine, where are you, Carol? Is on that committee. I don't know if anyone else in the room is, but we're very excited about what she's doing, and we're focusing on Title IX, pay equity, STEM, and leadership for women and girls. So there's a lot going on. As you know, in the fund world, we you successfully helped me complete a 2-year $1 million unrestricted campaign called Charting the Course. And California was the #1 in the donations for that. So thank you. And you know, because of that campaign in particular, unrestricted giving to where needed the most has increased at AAUW 67%. So that's awesome. We still love when people give to, we believe in donors' rights and donor intent, so we love when you give to where it's needed the most and where you're passionate about, and this event exemplifies that. Some of you may have received a recent email from Kim Churches talking about the rollout of our new recognition program for donors who cumulatively give $5,000 and above in a year. So it could be restricted, unrestricted, anything that equals $5,000. It's called Champions for Women and Girls. A couple of years ago when I came to AAUW, we did a stewardship audit and found out that we weren't recognizing major donors to the degree that we should. And a lot of you give a lot of money to AAUW, and we are so thankful for it. And this program it's not a campaign, there's no goal, it just recognizes our major donors. This campaign, this giving level also has 8 ambassadors across the nation that are the voice and face and champions themselves, and our own Liz Bathgate is one of those ambassadors. Thank you, Liz. Today we have in the room a champion herself who has cumulatively raised $5,000 or above this year, and I'd like to give her a new champion pin, and it's Carolyn Garfine. So, there you go, another pin. Thank you. And the last thing I'd like to say is that after a year searching we have a brand new plan giving director. Some of you may remember Catherine Gibson, and she sends her love to all her California ladies, as she calls all of you. But we searched and we found the perfect person. Her name is Heather Miller. She's here with us today. She has jumped right in and grabbed plan giving by the horns, and here she is to tell you about herself. Heather Miller.
Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you today. Yes, sorry, is that better? Yes. By way of background, a little bit about me. I come to you from Charlottesville, Virginia, is my hometown. I went to Virginia Commonwealth University for my undergrad, and I've spent the last 15 plus years in fundraising and development for various wonderful causes. I started in higher education, working at the University of Virginia. And my last 12 years of work was with the American Farmland Trust in Washington, D.C., a national conservation organization that does great work around the country. I'm thrilled to be here with AAUW. I've had such a warm welcome. I'm just now embarking on my 7th week of work, started in September. And I'd just like to say a few words to you today about the Legacy Circle. The Legacy Circle is a very special group of AAUW members and individuals who care deeply about our mission. We're led by a distinguished group of AAUW leaders known as the Legacy Circle team. These are 12 women nationwide working on this wonderful initiative. Liz Bathgate is our leader here in Northern California. Thank you for all that you do, Liz. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to recognize the Legacy Circle members that we have in the room today. So if you'd like to, please stand or wave if you are in the Legacy Circle. Thank you. By creating a special legacy, these members have made critical investments that will sustain AAUW long into the future. Our reasons for giving and our philanthropic choices are deeply personal. But our shared commitment to a better future for women and girls is the foundation of the deep commitment of all of our Legacy Circle members. Sometimes people perceive planned giving as something complex, but it really doesn't have to be. Did you know that there are a variety of ways that you can include AAUW in your estate or legacy plans? For example, there are planned gifts that cost you nothing during your lifetime. There are also planned gifts that may provide income to you during retirement, and along with tax benefits. So in conclusion, I just want you to remember that planned giving is very easy. You don't have to be wealthy to join the Legacy Circle, and your level of recognition is up to you. You may remain anonymous if you so choose. There are wonderful benefits to being a member of the Legacy Circle, not the least of which is the satisfaction of helping to sustain the mission of AAUW long into the future. If you have questions or would like to discuss it further, Liz or I would be happy to talk with you about it. And thank you so much once again for inviting me to speak.
I got so excited about lunch and about meeting the fellowship recipients that I forgot to introduce our past state presidents that are with us today. So we have Kathleen Cha, we have Alicia Hetman, and we have Chris Winter. So these are more dedicated women with AAUW. Thank you again so much for taking time today to join us. I think the fellowship and grant recipients are wonderful, and we'll see you next year, if not before. So thank you.